Well, oh, I thought it was official
I don't
ruling.
want to talk about sports for a minute, though. I don't want to talk about sports. I
Uh,
want to talk about something more important than sports for a minute.
what's more important than sports?
Media.
All right, fine. We can talk about the media, I guess. I don't want to.
What's the most important story in sports today, Eric?
Um, let me think. Did the Atlanta Falcons make a trade of Matt Ryan?
No.
Hold on. Did the Atlanta Braves sign a hitter?
No. Are you kidding?
Oh, sorry. The Atlanta Hawks finally got rid of Joe Johnson. Oh, let me go look it up.
No, we wouldn't be having a podcast if that were the case. I'd be celebrating in the streets.
Oh, well, then I'm just lost.
I'd have to start drinking.
Fine. What are we talking about?
Skip Bayless.
Listen, for those of you who did not see the first take destruction of Skip Bayless got housed. And not only was Skip Bayless housed, but Stephen A. Smith was housed. And they were not housed by someone with a PhD. They were not housed by a 30-year journalist. No. They were housed by what Joe Bellon describes as one of the 5 worst sports commentators currently doing pro basketball.
That is inaccurate, but I'll go back and correct you later. Keep going.
That is not true. That's not true. And ladies and gentlemen, I would like to give Jalen Rose a standing ovation. Listen.
And the children dance.
Dance, I tell you. Listen, Jalen Rose did what everyone else has been. We've said on this show a couple episodes ago, someone needs to blow that show up. And Jalen Rose went on there and gave Skip Bayless some of his own medicine. And it was beautiful. And Stephen A. Smith could not pull a Greta Stahl and could not pull his ass out the fire.
That's a debate reference for those of y'all who don't know who Greta Stahl is, and shame on you. She was a fantastic debater for Michigan State.
Those of you who are who know debate, you will get a good laugh out of that.
Yeah,
this is a beatdown of epic proportion.
And I want to say something about this too. When we talked about this earlier, and we said that First Take needs to have a crossfire moment. Mm-hmm. And what we meant by that was that there was a show on CNN called Crossfire that was an insufferable pretense for a debate show in which people went on and pretended to take specific positions in order to generate controversy. And Jon Stewart famously went on that show and told them the truth about their own show, and it destroyed the show. Jalen Rose may have, if we're lucky, I don't know if we're lucky, but if we're lucky, Jalen Rose may have just went Jon Stewart on First Take, because he didn't just criticize them. No. He spoke the truth that everyone knows, which is that show only exists because Skip Bayless and from time to time Stephen A. Smith and whoever the functional equivalent of Skip Bayless is that they have when Bayless isn't around, they call people names and they are disrespectful to people. It's not because they have some kind of penetrating analysis on that show or because it's a debate show. We've previously said it is not a debate show. It is people playing television, and the worst part about the subsequent episode of First Take that they had today is the host gets on and says, well, our only rule on this show is authenticity. Well, oh my God. You've got to be kidding me. That's the most ridiculous statement ever. Skip Bayless is the opposite of authentic. All he does is take positions to stir up controversy, and Jalen Rose went on there and called him out, and then Stephen A. Smith decided to get in.
Which he's done before.
He has done before, but he did it in such a calm and dare I say it, classy fashion that I think it's kind of impossible to ignore, especially when Stephen A. Smith desperately jumps into the fray. And to have Stephen A. Smith try to tell people about civility is like Karl Rove trying to tell people about how to run a clean political campaign. It's ridiculous. And Jalen stayed calm and made good points. I said Jalen was one of the worst former athletes who was commenting on ESPN, and I'll stick by that until just recently, because I felt like whenever they had him on, he took the shallowest possible answer. I thought he was not saying anything interesting, and I couldn't figure out why he was on that show. And I will concede that Bruce Bowen was probably worse.
Yes, but Bowen is much worse.
This was a moment. This was a transformative moment for me for Jalen Rose. I felt like, for the most part, his arguments were devastating. That when you just call people names, when that is the core of what you're doing, it's disrespectful, and it misunderstands I thought the best part of what he said was that it misunderstands the amount of effort that it takes to be a basketball professional. And he called them out for not understanding the role of the players who don't start, which I think is also a really accurate comment. Now, I'm not ready to go to the you had to have been a player to be a good analyst. That seems like a poor argument to me. But
Sure.
I thought the rest of his points were really true. You don't get anywhere calling people names and being ridiculous about it when that creates an opportunity cost. Every minute that Skip Bayless spends calling LeBron James Prince James or saying he doesn't have the clutch gene or whatever ad hominem attack that he does, it crowds out a moment where someone could be saying something interesting and penetrating and insightful about those same players or those same games.
I thought this episode was a microcosm of what's wrong with the show, and I was glad that Jalen came on and he essentially stopped the show. For those of you who didn't see the beginning part of the show, is Stephen A. and Skip Bayless doing their shtick, calling names, saying this. They have instead of the chosen one, like the catchphrases. He's not the chosen one, he's the frozen one. He's not Robin, he's Batman, he's Robin. Like the things you've heard them do every Wednesday. And when Jalen got on, it was kind of like they prefaced it because the host on the show said, we have not talked to Jalen, we do not know what he is about to say. This is all real, which I think that part of it is true. And what Jalen proceeds to do, in a moment, in basically 37 seconds, was he did what Skip Bayless does to every athlete who he doesn't have in his kind of like favorite category. The day before, for those of you who also missed it, Jalen Rose basically found Skip Bayless's high school stats and high school performances from when he played high school. Now, Skip Bayless talked about he played for 2 state championships and was a good high school player, but somehow that didn't translate to when he went to Vanderbilt. But he played for a legendary coach. Skip apparently was a JV basketball player in the 11th grade. To give you an idea of what that is like saying that you are a sophomore in college, but you were told to go back to high school and play high school football. It is very rare for an 11th grader to be on the JV of any team in high school. Normally, you are no longer a JVer once the 10th grade ends. So apparently, he was in a JV and averaged, and Skip Bayless conceded this, averaged 1.4 points. So Jalen then says, you are not any kind of Pistol Pete. You're more like Junior Pete or Wet Pistol.
Water Pistol Pete.
Water Pistol Pete. To which Skip Bayless got offended by because he said that Jalen did not do his homework. Jalen's argument, which was very valid, is this is nothing more than what you do on a daily basis for 4 hours.
Right.
While you may have been around journalism for 30 years, and you may have been a very good columnist at a lot of the newspapers you're in, you do not understand what those players go through. To say that LeBron James is not a good basketball player, or to better get to use the example of Kwame Brown. To say that Kwame Brown or Chris Bosh are somehow insignificant players is misunderstanding what it takes to be at the level they're at. If I compare Olajuwon to Kwame Brown, then yes, he looks like a very bad basketball player. But you also have to take into account the person who drafted him number 1 and who in all essence ruined his career, which was Michael Jordan. There's no conversation about that. So at the end of the day, Jalen Rose annihilates Skip Bayless. Stephen A. comes in and basically says, we're not going, he takes a very defiant stance. We're not going anywhere. We don't care what they say, and y'all shouldn't care either. Fine. Let's concede for a second that Stephen A. is correct. If no one cares what you say, you would not have a job. Right. You would not have listeners. You would not have First Take. So you clearly want people to care and listen to you, which is why you do the shtick you do. The problem is, as you clearly point out, is it takes away from saying something truly provocative. The best First Take I've ever seen in the last 2 years was Bomani Jones, Michael Smith, and there was another guy I can't remember. And it was all analysis about the game.
Yep.
You did not hear anyone call anyone a name, and it was still controversial. People had very divergent opinions about Tebow, about LeBron, about Carmelo. They had these issues, and there was more depth of what they do as players, and not he's Bosh Spice, or he's Prince James, or Russell Westbrook is not a point guard. And the problem is that when you have that kind of a platform, your ideas carry weight because you have credibility for no reason. And so when you start to say things like Durant and Westbrook have problems, all of a sudden that can create problems, because what if Westbrook is like, yo, who are you going behind my back telling that you got problems? So Stephen A. couldn't say that. And then what was even better was when Chris Carter comes on, who Skip Bayless famously said in a discussion of Tim Tebow, well, why should we care? Basically, I'm paraphrasing. Why should we care what you think? You don't have an NFL Super Bowl championship. Chris Carter is a Hall of Famer. I don't care if he's in or not. He's a Hall of Famer, 15 years, maybe top 5 wide receivers in NFL history. To compare the knowledge that Chris Carter has to what Stephen A. or Skip Bayless has is a joke. And I pray to God that this show, I pray to God, I never wish for people to be fired or lose their jobs, but, we're going to talk about Petrino in a second. I hope they fire him.
Yeah, look.
I hope they get rid of him and Stephen A. Smith, and they get people on there. It needs to go back to the old way, where they had interviews and they did other things. The platform's entirely skipped, and that was tiring.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what really reminded me of the Jon Stewart thing is that after you've got Bayless and Stephen A., when Jalen came in, it was like an adult had entered the room, yeah. which is crazy. Jalen, isn't necessarily a voice of great maturity or wisdom on ESPN, but he was acting like an adult, like a mature human being. And for my money, the very best part of that entire First Take segment is when Jalen just relentlessly ignored Stephen A. When Stephen A. is in the background, and he sounds, you can't see him when this is happening, but he sounds like a little kid jumping up and down demanding attention. Jalen Rose, you answer my question. Jalen Rose, you did this. And Jalen just ignores him and very calmly makes a series of very reasonable arguments about the way that show is being performed. And I don't want that show to end necessarily. I would just like it to not be awful, and there's a difference between, you can say Kwame Brown is playing poorly. You can say Kwame Brown should not start. You can say it was a mistake to draft him. But when you start making fun of his name and calling successful players bad nicknames, and that becomes the core of what you do, then you're no longer a debate. You never were a debate show, and you're no longer a legitimate sports show. You're as Jon Stewart said about Crossfire. He said this is theater, and that's exactly what First Take has become, and it's too bad. And I saw the same Bomani Jones Michael Smith episode of it, and it was so great. And we both said I'd watch that show every week. I love Michael Smith, and I like Bomani Jones.
Michael Jones needs his own show.
Yeah. Well, and they put Michael Smith in a bunch of different places. I like Numbers Never Lie, but I would love to see him in that situation. And Bomani Jones is really good at what he does. And honestly, Skip Bayless's time is done. That whole, I'm going to call people names and act like I'm smarter than I really am, and play those games. That's not the way that you actually have argument. It's a disservice to the concept of argument about sports for you to behave that way. And again, Jalen seemed like the adult. And I don't know how you go back, but then again, you can probably never be wrong underestimating people's ability to be discriminate about this sort of thing. So maybe it'll continue to go for another 10 years.
I will say this. As a microcosm, I was sitting with my mother today, and we were watching the discussion happen, live. Now, my mom never looks at First Take. My mom she watches The View, morning shows that are coming on like network television. My mom made 2 very interesting observations about that show. Remember, my mother does not watch sports enough to want to watch First Take. First time she watches it, she says the following: what are they doing? Why are they saying this is debate? This looks like The View. That's number one. The second thing she says about, and I swear to God, this is what she said. She looks at Skip Bayless, she says, Skip Bayless looks like one of those people, I'm not going to say the political, like she said he looked like not a Republican, whatever. She said he looks like one of those people who thinks that they're smarter than they really are, and they're saying a lot of words and it has no meaning.
Yeah.
And for the average person who doesn't watch sports to make that brilliant of an observation in the span of 30 minutes of watching television lets you know that their time is kind of past. Maybe you should coach Skip Bayless to talk a different way, and frankly, he may not. That's fine. Get him off the air, put someone on the air who is on. But they've done that. The show will end, in my opinion, because of the fact that they've given it such a platform they cannot turn back. They can't go back to the old way of which what they used to do was have a topic, interview some people, it'll be kind of cool. It would kind of break up the monotony of Skip Bayless. Now that the show is 2 hours of just Skip and Player X, it's gotten old, and it is theater, and it's kind of masquerading as something that I don't know what it is.
Well, I want to say one more thing about this, and I don't want to plunge too far off the deep end of deep argument about this, but this is important because that show constantly refers to itself as a debate show. And, you know, if there's anything in the world I'm an expert on, and maybe there isn't, but if there is anything in the world I'm an expert on, it's debate. And debate is supposed to help you learn. It is supposed to move a conversation forward. When we have competitive debates, we stick people on two sides of an issue artificially, and we make them debate stuff. But even in those debates, even in the debates that have structures and rules, people don't end up the same place at the end of the debate as where they started. They concede arguments. You know, they come up with new arguments. Shows like First Take are not debate shows because the two people end up at the same spot they started at. There's no room for them to move forward. There's no room for the debate to inform them, to change who they are, or to change their minds or make their positions different. And that is because Skip Bayless and the other people who functionally replace him are made to be you know, not caricatures of humans. And if they had real people on there, someone would make an argument and another person would say, wow, that's a really good argument occasionally, and we would change the conversation. You know, when real people sit down and have conversations about sports, this is what happens. You know, and even if it's not a structured debate, a debate ought to move a conversation forward, not just make it stagnate in theater. And ESPN is owned by Disney, which is the largest media corporation in the world. Disney has enough money. They could afford to take a flyer and try to have a show that actually does something other than be ridiculous theater. I don't think they will, because it's easier not to. But they shouldn't call it debate. Debate is supposed to teach us and to move us forward and to help us change our minds about stuff, and that show does none of that.
I think what you're saying eloquently is kind of what Chris Carter said, which is their job as journalists on that show is to inform the public about the intricacies of the sport that the average person has no access to. And this show is becoming more about creating news and creating stories because Skip Bayless says X.
Yeah. When you can legitimately say that a show has substantially less depth of argument than Around the Horn, you know it's time to move on.
Sure. And I mean, there are aspects of Around the Horn that are kind of interesting. Again,
I like Around the Horn. Around the Horn. It says it's a game show.
Yeah, no. It's seriously a game show, and it's interesting, and it has some divergent points. But don't masquerade yourself. Like, this isn't even presidential debates. Like, you know, I understand there are different interpretations of debate. That's fine. It's not even a presidential debate. It's not that way. It's not a debate of any kind. It literally is, as my mom says, it's The View. It's the male version of The View. And if that's what you want to be, that's fine. But your opinions, but you can't call yourself The View, because if you do, then you lose credibility among your subject, your audience. You can't be The View and then support Tebow. Who cares that The View supports him, Tebow? So, you know, this should be the end of that show. I don't, there's no other way to say it, because there's no turning back from what is obviously a horrendous flaw. Like, when you watch it tomorrow, are you going to take what they say seriously? No, you've got a 50 or 60-year-old person who couldn't score 2 points in his senior year in high school telling other people that LeBron James is a very bad basketball player. I understand that argument isn't that persuasive, but it is persuasive in the sense of, okay, who are you to say that this person isn't great when you don't like it when people don't call you great? It's a dynamic there that I don't like.
Yeah, I agree with you. Time
Again,
for it
if
to go.
Skip Bayless had at least 1% of the talent that his brother has at cooking, the show would be better.
Yeah, and by all accounts, his brother is a wonderful human being. What happened?
Maybe he didn't live with. Apparently, Skip Bayless was from the ghettos of Oklahoma City.
Yeah. Look, that show needs to end. I think that's about it. It either needs to end or it needs to radically transform and restaff. It's a disgrace the way it is.